Welcome to the presentation on genre, or Once Upon a Time There Was a Beautiful and Talented Genre. Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare. Interesting play when we think about genre, because it starts off as a classic comedy. At least the Elizabethan audience would probably recognise that they were being treated to a classic comedy, because the play starts off with a chorus, the language is very flowery, and then about halfway through it's as though the genre changes and the language becomes very dark and bleak, and sure enough the play turns out to be a tragedy. So Shakespeare here is sort of playing with genres. He's synthesizing genres, if you like, for dramatic effect. So when we think of this concept of genre, we often think of it in terms of literary works like plays and novels and things like that, texts like that. But in this presentation, we're going to take a more linguistic view of genre and understand it as being a kind of patterning that occurs in many texts. In fact, all texts that we produce are intelligible insofar as they belong to a particular genre. Now, what you see on the screen here is a text, believe it or not. Of course, you don't probably recognize what it says, because what I've done, it's in English, but what I've done is substitute symbols for the letters that you're not familiar with. And I did that because I wanted you to imagine what it feels like to be a beginning reader. When you're a beginning reader, in a way, this is what a text might look like, feel like. A bunch of pretty symbols, but not much else. And of course, what you've got to do is build up a sight vocabulary. So when you see a word, a certain configuration of graphic symbols, you can hear it sound almost automatically. So you become familiar with a body of words, and we can call this building up your sight word vocabulary. Well, it's actually very difficult to do or more difficult to do if you encounter words outside of genres. And to prove that, I'm going to tell you what the genre is here, and then we're going to actually read it. The genre is a pop song, and it's about a yellow submersible vessel. Any ideas what it is? Okay, that's what it is. It's actually the beginning of the Beatles' We All Live in a Yellow Submarine. So what I'd like us to do is follow along with the song and see if you can actually track the words as we sing them together. So 1, 2, 3, 4. We all live in a yellow submarine. A yellow submarine, a yellow submarine. We all live in a yellow submarine. A yellow submarine, a yellow submarine. I apologise for my singing. I hope you did a better job. But do you get the idea here? We're now actually bringing some meaning, a familiar song that we already know, to these symbols. And in time, if you were to do this often, you would start to see the symbols differently. They would actually start to resonate with sound and not just be an interesting configuration of shapes. I could imagine putting this song on cardboard strips and cutting up the words and having you rearrange the words, and as you do it, you point to the word as you. So really to kind of reinforce the idea of the word to sound correspondence. So genre plays a role then, I think, right from the beginning, right from the get-go. And it's something that is so deep with us that it's easy to not to underestimate. Now, this is a text that's pure nonsense. Let me read it. Once upon a time, there was a little white mouse called Tiptoe. It's very rarely hot in Paris. When does the race start? It does so. No, I don't know how to make chocolate crackles. All right, so pure nonsense. I mean, each sentence may make sense, and you could try to perhaps figure out a context in which it makes sense, but the text as a whole doesn't hang together. It doesn't have texture, in other words. Now, this text is also nonsense, but it hangs together, but not in the way you might expect it to. It's still nonsense, and yet it does have a certain kind of texture, and I'm going to read it in a way that tries to bring out its texture. So here goes. Once upon a time, there was a little dog called Sam. The children lived in the woods in the most beautiful cottage you ever did see. That afternoon, the ogre was feeling very hungry again. But it was no use. George had not a penny left. So they ran and they ran and they ran until finally old Mother Witch could no longer see them. Oh, that was some adventure, he mused. And so they never went on the underground train alone ever again. Okay, pure nonsense. And yet it does seem to hang together in a certain way. It does seem to have a kind of structure. Well, that structure is related to its genre. Because you know this genre, you sense the structure. And to really pull this out, let me just take it apart a little bit. So I started off by saying, once upon a time, there was a little dog called Sam. Well, that's a classic way of starting off a story. It's sort of signalling that a story is going to be told. So we can call that an orientation. It's like I'm orientating my storytelling listeners to a story that's about to be told. And then the next thing that was said was the children lived in the woods in the most beautiful cottage you ever did see. Following from the orientation, there is a generic expectation that there will be a setting, a time and place, and that's what I gave you. Following that, that afternoon, the ogre was feeling very hungry again. That's sort of a disturbing thought. So there's a complication going on here. Events leading up to a climax is the implication of this. And here indeed is the climax, but it was no use. George had not a penny left. And following the climax, a resolution. So they ran and they ran and they ran until finally old Mother Witch could no longer see them. Phew. And then following that, another expectation, evaluation, a kind of a commentary on the story. That was some adventure, he mused. And then even right at the end, you get another thing that we often find in folk tales, a coda, a kind of a wrapping things up and pointing out a moral purpose, basically. Now, of course, each segment belonged to a different story, and that's why the whole thing was nonsense. But it was arranged deliberately to follow this particular generic pattern: orientation, setting, complication, climax, resolution, evaluation, coda. And those are elements in that particular order that we are familiar with because we're familiar with the genre of folk narratives. And that makes a difference to how we hear it, how we make sense of it. So genres then are not just something to consider for artistic effect, as indeed Shakespeare puts genres to great use in Romeo and Juliet, as we've already discussed. Comedy turns into a tragedy, but it's even more basic than that. we encounter language through genres, if you like. And this really came home to me when I started to think about improvising stories. Why would I start thinking about improvising stories, you may well ask? Well, many, many years ago, when I was a kid, hundreds of years ago, okay. Oh, and look at my haircut. Thanks, Mom. Wonderful. I used to babysit for some cousins, and I would enjoy this very much. I would enjoy telling them stories at bedtime, and they enjoyed it, as I think. Well, one day I decided to make up a story, and I had them as characters in the story. Well, needless to say, they absolutely loved that. And every time I went to babysit after that time, they insisted that I make a story up. I would say, oh, let's read this story, pulling a book off their shelf. And they say, no, Jed, we want one from your head. Okay. So I would make up a story. And what astonished me, because I was a little bit nervous about this, as you could imagine, but what astonished me was I could do it. So what's going on when we improvise a story? Well, again, I think it shows the importance of genre. Let me kind of demonstrate this for you, because I'm going to pretend to improvise a story. Obviously, it's a pretense because I've created these slides. But I want you to imagine that I'm making this up. So I start off the story. My cousins are insisting I tell them a story from my head. Okay, well, how am I going to start off? Okay, so I come up with something. There was a dog named Sam. And then it's as though this little voice comes into my head. Okay, I better make him do something. I'll make him cross the road. So then I say, and he was walking across the road one day. And that, again, elicits some sort of a sense in my mind. I'll make it a really big road, I think. Walking across a very busy road. Oh, this could be dangerous, I think. Sam should not have been there. Sam knew this was not the place to be for a dog. So why was he there then? It had been a very bad day for Sam. He was lost. What will happen to Sam? What shall I have happen to him after he's crossed the road? So the red text then is sort of my, maybe it's subliminal, maybe it's not completely conscious, but it's my feelings about where I have to go next in the story. I'm going to stop there. But I hope you agree, this does feel like a story, and hopefully I've got my audience hooked. So I want to look at this even more closely. I started off by saying there was a dog named Sam, and I thought, well, I better make him do something. I haven't crossed the road. Why did I think that? Well, I think I'm drawing here on my sense that there needs to be agents who do things. So I come up with, and he was walking across the road one day. Which then leads me to think, well, let's make it a really big road. Why did I want to do that? Well, again, I think it's because I was drawing on my sense that there needs to be an orientation for the story. An orientation. So I come up with this. Walking across a very busy road. Which elicits this thought, this could be dangerous. And I think that thought is the result of me drawing upon my sense that there needs to be a complicating action. So I come up with, Sam should not have been there. Sam knew this was not the place to be for a dog. Why was he there then? So I'm drawing on my sense that the narrator can place evaluative comments. Actually, that last piece there is an evaluative comment. It had been a very bad day for Sam. He was lost. Another sort of confirmation of that evaluation. What will happen to Sam? What shall I have happen to him after he's crossed the road? There I'm drawing on my sense that there needs to be a future climaxing action. And a story has a movement, and it's the promise of this climaxing action that is this movement, if you like. And that's when we say oh gosh, you've got me hooked. It's because you want to see where this is going to go, right up to the end, and hopefully it has a happy ending. But not all stories do, of course. Okay, so let me put the blue text together now in this next slide, and I notice I've called this a story grammar. So let's compile this. So I thought about agents or characters that do things, complicating action, a narrator who can produce evaluative comments, and climaxes. And I'm sure there are other things too that I'm thinking about, even if it's subliminal. But these are some of the elements then that go into the genre of a story. And having a sense of these things enabled me to improvise a story. And that's, I think, worth reflecting upon, because it means when you are improvising something, in this case it was a story, you are better off when you can align yourself to the patterns of the thing that you are making meaning with. The patterns of a story. If you have a sense of what those patterns are, and here's a sample of what some of those patterns are, you have a sense of where to go. You're not completely alone. So it's a very daunting feeling, isn't it, to be alone when you're improvising. You're not following a script, you're improvising. But if you can align yourself to that, to a structure, if you like, then you've got a place to go. Here's something I heard in a bar. Well, this person has a little too much to drink, and he attacked me, but the friend came in and she stopped it. All right, it's something that happened very rapidly. Somebody said this, but notice it follows very much the structure of a narrative. Has an orientation, a complication, and a resolution. And linguists like to, as effectively and efficiently as possible, try to capture what these structures are, and they've come up with a system for doing that. And what you see at the bottom here is their representation of the structure of a story. And I'll talk a bit more about that later on. But anyway, I wanted to just to suggest from this example that even in everyday circumstances, when we don't think we're improvising, we're often improvising. Really, we are aligning ourselves to the resources of particular genres. So, big message here: genres are pretty fundamental to the way we make meaning. So here's a definition, a formal definition, if you like. This is actually a definition written by J.R. Martin, who is an Australian linguist who worked with M.A.K. Halliday. And he says that a genre is a staged, goal-orientated, purposeful activity in which speakers engage as members of our culture. I think that's a really useful definition. Notice he says it's a purposeful activity. The genre isn't form and structure, it's a purposeful activity. It has form, it has structure, but it is a purposeful activity. The structures that it has are in the service of it being a purposeful activity. So from a systemic functional linguistic perspective, function then plays this very important role. This is a way of looking at meaning making that puts the social functionality of texts in the front, in the forefront. Another thing to notice about this definition is Martin says that it is a staged, goal-orientated, purposeful activity. Genres have stages. Why do they have stages? Well, one obvious reason is because meaning sometimes has to be unfolded. We can't say everything right away. We have to take our time in unpacking the thing we're trying to say. So genres have evolved to accommodate that unfolding, and every genre unfolds things in different ways, and that's what we mean then by saying it has stages. You're going to hear me refer to genres generic stages, right? The way it's staged. And here's another definition he came up with. Genres are how things get done when language is used to accomplish them. So that's an even pithier way of underlining this idea that genres and social function are at the heart of all of this. And here are a few types of genres. Well, we know about the first one, literary genres. When most people when they think of genres, they think of literary genres like comedies, tragedies, novels, perhaps different kinds of novels, mystery novels, and romantic novels, and so on. But we can also think of genres in not as literary works at all, but popular written works. We can think of educational genres, and we definitely can think of everyday genres. Now let's put some flesh to these four types, if you like, and see what we can come up with. So I'm not going to spend much time on the literary genres. There's some examples there. Popular written genres, though. Let's look at the second one. So an instructional manual lays things out in a particular way. It's a staged, remember, staged, goal-orientated a thing. So it constitutes a genre. Newspaper articles, and of course there's different kinds of newspaper articles, and so we might be talking about more than one subgenre there. Same with magazine reports. Recipes, another great example of a popular written genre that we use. But you could go on. You could make the list really, really long. A shopping list is a genre. It has a particular function, and therefore its staging reflects that function, and so on. Educational genres, the next bullet, very important for us as teachers to hone in on what those genres are that are going to be most important for our children to master if they're going to be successful at school. Out of all the millions of genres there seems to be a very small set of genres which play a very big role in the academy. So knowing about those, knowing what they are, how they work, it's going to be important for us. And then everyday genres. When you go and buy something at a shop or sell something in a market or whatever, you're using language, and that language has patterns in it that the people participating in the situation will be somewhat attuned to. So when you start thinking about it, we are just surrounded by genres. Even gossiping has its sort of generic forms. So here's an example of a popular genre, a recipe, and this recipe here, it's a real recipe actually. I think illustrates very nicely the sort of generic features that recipes typically have. So let's analyze it a little bit. It starts off with a title. The title is realized by a nominal group, not by a complete clause or sentence. Spinach risotto. If you were writing a recipe, almost certainly you would have a title. This next bit, I'm going to call that enticement. This traditional dish of, it's almost like this part wants you to be attracted to the recipe, so it's enticing you. Notice that beginnings are with a be clause, this dish, and the descriptions use positive attitudinal words: traditional, economical, substantial, and so on. Right? So one of the grammatical features of enticements is this use of positive attitudinal words. Next, we've got a list of ingredients, a nominal group again, but this time not classifying words but numbers and measuring words. And notice that the head noun is the name of a food. And following this, we have the method. This is realized in clauses in the imperative mood, do this, rather than the declarative mood, which would be like a set of statements. So let me just say a little bit to remind us about what we mean here by moods. So we've got, let's think about these three major moods here. We've got the imperative mood, which basically means like a command. Sit down. That would be a great example of that. That would be in the imperative mood. Sit down. An interrogative mood is like a question. Would you like to sit down? And the declarative mood is like a statement. I'm more comfortable when everyone is sitting down. Alright, so we've got these three basic moods then. Imperative moods, a command. Interrogative mood, a question. Declarative mood, a statement. Alright, well, back to the recipe. Also in method, notice the use of circumstantial meanings. Now, if you know anything about transitivity in SFL, you'll know that circumstance plays a big role in the transitivity system. Don't mind that too much now, but anyway, let's just look at the circumstantial meanings in the method. You've got circumstantial meanings of three things actually: location, time, and manner. Let's look at the location one first. You've got a prepositional phrase, in a large saucepan. You've got, so for time, you've got for about 10 minutes. And for manner, you've got until soft. And it would be interesting to look at, the methods of other recipes to see how circumstantial meanings are present in those. The clauses in this method are linked logically by time sequence. Then you do this, then you do that. Although this is not always explicitly encoded. Then only occurs once actually, but it's implied. What else can we say? Well, the kinds of verbs are action-orientated verbs. In SFL terminology, they are material processes like slice, wash, heat, fry, cook, and so on. So those are some of the characteristics then of the method stage. And then finally, at the bottom here, serving quantity is realized by an elliptical declarative, serves for. Elliptical declarative, we know what declarative means, right? It's a statement. Elliptical basically means that it is expressed with extreme economy. We only have part of a clause. The full clause would be, this dish serves for. But ellipsis has been applied. So instead of saying this dish serves for, we merely say serves for, and we understand that it means this dish serves for. So that's what elliptical declarative means. All right, and so let's summarize all of this in a schematic way. This is the typical linguistic approach to representing generic stages. So we have the title, followed by enticement, followed by ingredients, followed by methods, followed by serving quantity. Notice that enticement is written between regular brackets. That just means that this is an optional schematic stage in the genre. Sometimes an enticement is included and sometimes it isn't. That's basically what that means. So, given this way of describing generic stages, what kind of a genre is this next one? Well, hopefully you figured out that it was a story or narrative. What about this one? Well, again, hopefully you figured out that this is probably an academic essay. It's making a case or arguing. So just to sum up, we've got square brackets then to demarcate the whole schematic description. So we've got a square bracket at the beginning, a square bracket at the end. Curly brackets signal recursivity. In other words then, everything between the curly brackets means that those stages can repeat. And what else do we need to say? Well, the regular brackets mean that that stage is optional. I think I've already mentioned that. Now, this analysis, this way of analysing generic stages, is not saying that this must be the structure of an academic essay. Just to use the last one as an example, it's not saying that this must be the structure of an academic essay in order to count as an academic essay. It's not meant to be taken prescriptively, in other words. And of course, it's not meant to be taken as an exhaustive analysis either. There's a lot more going on in academic writing than is captured by this. But it is saying that academic essays are a potential genre and that this is a common form in which they might get realised. And it's a useful thing. It's not every academic essay will have all these stages laid out like this, but they tend to. And some genres, of course, are a mixture of more than one genre, as we saw with Romeo and Juliet. But we can only speak of a mixture of genres if we have a sense of the genre in its sort of purer form, if you like. All right then. So enough about then the kind of theory of genres and so on. Let's have a look at some types of genres, and we're going to start with this dialogue about dog breeding. So have a look at this and come back when you've read it. People tell stories about what has happened. In casual conversation, we mostly talk about ourselves, what we did, how we feel, what we think. You know, if you think about it, life is rushing by, and only our memories and the stories we tell keeps life from disappearing almost as it happens. So narratives are pretty fundamental to us. Of course, in school, we want children to explore genres other than just narratives. But it's a good idea to figure out what it is about the narrative genre that is similar perhaps to these other genres that kids might have to master if they're going to do well in school. Well, let's look at a piece of student writing that occurred in school. Here's a piece called Our Field Trip. So I want you to read this and ask yourself how this young child's text is similar or different from the first text. Seems to me that both texts are about something that the writer has personally experienced, right? The stories are built up around a sequence of actions. The first one was getting into dog breeding, and the second one was going on a school excursion. So we could list the events of the first one like this. I think that pretty much captures the events that the person, that the people in the dialogue portray, and then the second text could be captured like this. So let me ask the question again. What exactly are the differences between the two texts? Well, if I had to answer this in one word, I would say feelings. In the first text, we have phrases like, I just fell in love with it. I'd always just liked dogs. She was terrible. She's the worst dog I've ever seen, and so on. Feelings, right? But the child text, the second text, doesn't tell us how she felt about the trip. I think that's really interesting. In general, everyday speech tends to be personal, whereas in general, academic writing tends to be impersonal. Of course, I'm generalizing here. But it seems that the child author of the second text has already understood this, has already understood that the writing that you do in school requires a certain impersonality. Impersonal. Yeah, is that right? Is that a word? Impersonality? I think it is. And that bothers some teachers, of course. You know, we think it's important that we write expressively, and we encourage children to write stories, for example. But it's important that we understand that factual writing, all those genres that we might lump together as genres of factual writing, actually go out of their way to depersonalize the recording of experience. So we need to understand this a bit better. Have a look at these two pieces taken from Martin's old but classic book Factual Writing, which came out in 1985. The first one is an example of procedural writing. So procedure is a type of factual writing that's like narrative in that it's built up around a sequence of events. And the second one is an example of a recount. Recount. Well, what is this? Well, let me just say that text 2 is text 1 rewritten as a recount. So what is the difference between the two texts? Well, if I could say it in one word, it would be generality. The procedural text talks about how to grow beans and talks generally about how to do this. The people, places and things are all general. You refers to people in general, not to the reader. Similarly, beans refers to beans as a class. The actions are also general, so the verbs are timeless, referring not to what someone did or is doing or will do, but to what they do in general. Get the idea? The young writer achieves this in two ways. Sometimes she uses the simple present tense. The first thing you do, buy them. Alternatively, she uses clauses in the imperative mood, which are not marked for tense at all. Buy them, bring them home. Procedural writing can make use of both of these possibilities, although in a mature text one alternative is selected and used consistently. Okay then, but what about the recounts? Let's consider recounts next. Well, recounts are not about generality. If they're not about generality, what are they about? Well, they're about specificity. The we refers to particular people. A packet of beans refers to a specific collection of bean seeds. The events are specific. They actually happened. Okay, so let's just go back to procedural writing for a moment. The first text in the previous slide procedure was really a mixture of two subgenres, instructions and directions. And ideally, it should have been one or the other. It needed to be either instruction or direction. So let's have a look at it again and see if you can figure out what distinguishes instructions from directions. Well, instructions consist of a series of imperative clauses, which is one of the features of recipes, you'll recall. So if we're writing instructions, we might write, what might we write? Well, we might write, in order to grow beans, go to the shop, get a packet of bean seeds and buy them, then bring them home. See, a series of imperative clauses. Whereas directions use declarative clauses, right? Declarative clauses in the simple present tense with a generalized actor realized by you, and less frequently we or one. So if we're writing directions, we might write, in order to grow beans, one goes to the shop, or you go to the shop. You get a packet of seeds and you buy them. Then you bring them home. Declarative clauses. So let's recap. There are procedures and there are recounts, and procedural writing can come in the form of instructions or directions, as the slide shows. And I think it would be good for our students to get a feel for the difference, certainly the difference between recounts and procedures. And what is the difference exactly between recounts and procedures? Procedures are general about how things are done. They describe the way the world is focusing on events, okay? Recounts are examples of how particular things get done. They don't generalize beyond particular experiences. In this, recounts are limited, like narrative writing. This is perhaps why we've developed factual genres to go beyond individual experience in order to interpret and understand, to produce generalizable accounts. So from a teaching perspective, I think it would be good to be clear about all this so that students can be clear that procedural writing explores the world differently to recounts. Okay, now for something completely different. My dad came from England. My mum came from the USA. My nana came from the USA. My bestefar came from Norway. My great-grandmother came from England. My great-grandfather came from Ireland. What's the purpose of this text? I'd say it wasn't to tell us what happens, so much as to describe. Texts which focus on particular individuals and specify some of their characteristics are called descriptions. Have a look at this text, this second text here. Birds live up in a tree. If they don't eat, they die. Red birds, black birds, any coloured birds, dark birds, light birds. Some are small and others are big. Now this is a closely related genre to descriptions, but notice that it focuses on classes of things rather than individuals. So does that remind you of another genre? Yes, it should. The report. So I would call this an example of report writing. Now in text 3, can you see what I've done here? My bird lived up in a tree. It ate so it wouldn't die. It was a blackbird and it was small. What I've done actually is I've turned the second text, which was a report, into a description. We could do the opposite. We could turn, say, the first text, the where my family came from text, into a report. It might look like this. Americans come from many different countries, including England, Ireland and Norway. Many Americans were born right here in the USA. Now notice that it is thing focused, not event focused. Yeah? Alright, well, let's summarize all this. Now hopefully this matrix speaks for itself, but you may need to study it for a bit before we move on. Descriptions are examples of reports, just as recounts are examples of procedures. Both procedures and reports generalize particular experiences. Just like focusing on the differences between recounts and procedures, focusing on the differences between descriptions and reports, teachers could help students to write consistently in each genre, perhaps. So here's an even simpler, perhaps, summary of it all. Recount, how something actually happened. Procedure, how something is done. Description, what some particular thing is like. Report, what an entire class of things is like. Well, I feel it's that time again, as the moon rises and the sun sets. You'll be glad to know that Sam finally got home safely and they all lived happily ever after. As for the risotto, well, let's just say serves four. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed this short introduction to genre, and that perhaps it's provoked some ideas for what our challenges are and what we may need to study a bit more closely, a bit more carefully. Now, you may have noticed that I several times translated one genre into another. And I think this is not just a way to better bring out the differences for the purposes of explanation. It's also an interesting and fun thing to do. I want to say it's a playful thing to do, and it's helpful for us to play with genres to really understand what's going on with them. But I also think it would be great for kids to do this too. For example, imagine you have a feel for the functional stages of a genre. You can then create parodies, something that kids really like doing. Imagine designing, for example, a fake recipe using inappropriate ingredients and inappropriate procedures, but you're going to produce the recipe so that it looks like a legitimate recipe. I mean, you can have a lot of fun with doing things like that. All right, well, this is all for now. So I hope you found the whole video useful, and there'll be more to come. Take care.